thanks for tuning in. From Municipal World, I'm Susan Gardner. This is the MW Shares podcast, where we share your stories, providing insights into the challenges and opportunities facing local governments and communities just like yours. The MW Shares podcast is powered by Shure Microphones. Thanks for joining us for another episode of MW Shares, where we're working to keep listeners up to date on the municipal pandemic response. Today, we have Richard Florida joining us. Richard is a professor at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management and School of Cities. His books include The Rise of the Creative Class and The New Urban Crisis. Welcome, Richard.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
As a backdrop for our conversation today, let's start with you and talk a little bit about your past research with respect to cities and theories of local economic success that have come out of that.
Well, I've been studying cities for a long, long time and not exactly sure what my contribution is. I mean, lots of different things that I've been working on with my research team, but I guess I've tried to focus on really the economic development aspects of cities and urban regions, and in particular the way that, really drawing from the great Jane Jacobs, that clusters and dense and diverse clusters of talented and creative people kind of motivate innovation and urban economic advance. That's what makes cities great. That's what powers economies. And I never really, given what's happening in our world now, I never really paid attention at all to infectious disease or pandemics. There's a great irony in all of that, because I was born in 1957, literally born. My mother was pregnant with me in the middle of a pretty great pandemic, which killed upwards of 100,000 Americans. No one ever told me about it. My folks never mentioned it. And I guess, having lived through the Great Depression, and they had suffered with, my dad with scarlet fever, my mom with diphtheria, both of them almost died. My dad served in World War II as an infantry soldier. They had seen enough, and maybe a pandemic didn't make quite the impact that this one does on our lives. We've been very lucky. But the point of fact is, I had never considered them. And you think about that, not only 57, but 1918, the great pandemic of 1918, the London cholera epidemic, many life-changing, society-altering events. And I had not even thought about them, not once, not given a second thought. I think one of the things is this has caused me to kind of reframe my own research and to rethink the role of cities, not only as these dense clusters of human beings, lead us to the advance of innovation in industries, but on the flip side, how these great clusters of humanity also propagate infectious disease. And I guess I would say, weighing the history, because I've gone back and read a lot of history, talked to a lot of people, historians and urbanists, who have looked at the health and medical and public health aspects of pandemics. And I think that throughout all of human history, the positive aspects of urbanization to bring people together and to power innovation and economic advance have always overcome the flip side, the downsides of urbanization, as they give rise to and propagate infectious disease. So I guess the short answer is, we've got a tough road ahead of us, but I'm betting on cities to come out of this to survive and thrive in the future.
I think a lot of us, as you've said, have kind of had pause during this, certainly to think about the things that we never really had to think about before, certainly not in our generation. We haven't seen these kinds of interruptions to the economy on this kind of scale, these kinds of health issues, and how these things intersect with cities, and what the short and long-term impacts of that are. So in recent years, the success of cities and the success of local economies, and a lot of it, I think you're being very modest about the impact your work has had on that. But certainly we've come to recognize the correlation in large cities with this concept of vibrance, feet on the street, authentic experiences, the availability of arts and culture. And COVID-19 has changed all of that. And there's a lot of discussion, about the fact that some things will have changed forever. What do you think?
Well, I don't think they'll change forever. I think depending, and they didn't change forever. I mean, you think about, 1918 or the cholera epidemic. In terms of the evolution of great cities like London or New York or Paris or Tokyo or Toronto, I could Montreal, you didn't think about them. Like they don't make, in the long run, they haven't derailed the ability of cities to be centers for arts and culture, scientific advance, for humanity's great achievements, great universities, great cultural institutions. So in the long run, everything will be fine. In the short run, things will change. And depending on how long the short run lasts, in other words, if you look back at 1918, which is a reasonable benchmark, it took about 18 to 24 months to get clear of the Spanish flu pandemic. And it occurred in really three waves: a small spring wave, a much bigger fall wave, and then a small, again, winter spring wave, and then it was over. But there were no treatments then. People lived in crowded tenements. They worked in crowded factories. There was a war going on. The factories there was very limited social distancing. There was no internet. There was no remote work. There were no antibiotics. My father always used to say that to me. There were no antibiotics, never mind antiviral treatments. And there were no vaccines that could mitigate this. So, I think we're likely to have some reasonable antivirals pretty soon, cocktails of treatments. A vaccine could take anywhere from, if we're lucky, 8 months to 12 months, if we're really lucky, to more like 18 months to 2 years. And we have much better ability to socially distance, to get information to people, to flatten the so-called curve. So depending on how long that is, if it's 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 24 months, the changes will be more or less permanent. And my hunch is less more than more. I think people are going to be scared of some things. They're going to be scared of crowds. They're going to be scared of the subway, and that's true in China. Everything we're seeing is that transit ridership is way down. You look at a city like Toronto or New York or Chicago, that's going to be a nightmare. Even if people are working remotely, if everyone starts driving their car to work, these already congested cities are going to cease to function and flow. I think there will be a little bit of a preference for suburban living. I think that you will see some people, especially people with kids, and I have two little ones, say, I want a backyard and a swing set. Now, I think young people will always go to cities to find their dreams, but anyone with a health problem, a pre-existing condition with kids might say, for a time being, I'd like a little patch of grass. I think however, I think industries will have to cluster in cities. I don't think finance industries will leave places like Toronto or New York. I don't think technology industries will leave places like San Francisco. And in fact, if air travel is restricted, and you can't hop, skip, and jump from one place to another, in fact, those industries are more likely to concentrate in the short run in those big cities, the Torontos, the New Yorks, the Londons, the San Franciscos, the LAs for entertainment of the world. I'm worried about the Main Street businesses, the small businesses, the coffee shops, the independent restaurants, the independent theaters, the music venues, the arts and cultural economy that give our cities life and that create that sidewalk ballet that people like Jane Jacobs talked about. Imagine if this goes on for a while. If the lockdowns continue, a lot of these places are going to go belly up, and not just small business. Small business can get a loan, maybe. The arts and cultural economy are depending on donations, people coming to see performances, grants. It'd be much harder to sustain them. So what I've been talking and writing about is how we have to provide the financial resource for these groups to get through. But it's not like you're going to flip a switch or hit a reset button and everything's going to pop back to normal. There's going to be a period of anywhere from 3 to 18 months, hopefully towards the shorter end of that, when we're going to have to socially distance. When we're not going to be able to gather in crowds. And we've got to prepare, these arts and cultural organizations and small businesses. I mean, it's one thing if you're a large supermarket chain or an airport and you understand, what you have to do to create social distancing, to get people personal protective equipment, to redesign your place, to space people out, the waiting room, the baggage claim, the security line. It's different if you're a small business. You don't have that at your disposal, a hair salon, a nail salon. A restaurant. So I think one of the things I've been calling for is preparedness plans. Everyone's talking about mobilization to beat back the virus and to provide financial assistance to businesses and workers. What I've been working on is a separate and parallel track about how to prepare and ready cities to reopen, and everything from airports and arenas over the long run to subways and transit in the short run, to getting small business and arts and cultural venues back on track, because they're not going to go back, at least for a while. They're not going to go back to the way they were before. The
So
question I always like to ask is when will you feel comfortable using transit? When will you feel comfortable taking your kids to a playground? When will you feel comfortable going to a hockey or a basketball game?
I think what you've said kind of touches on this aspect of this that is, aside from the reality of the health concerns, which are very real, the extent to which a global event like this changes people's psyches, changes people's ways of thinking. And we've talked certainly a lot in recent years about, the value of density and having, this access to things in close proximity to where you live, small communities, small urban communities that are dense, and you have access to everything where you work, live, and play. That idea, and that's going to be something that, as you say, is impacted, and it's going to have an impact on, certainly projections that a large number of working class people are not going to have jobs to go back to. Those smaller places are not going to be able to return if this is sustained for a long period. What do you think the longer term implications of that might be for us?
Well, one of the ways urbanists and urban economists like to distinguish what's important about cities is to characterize two kinds of functions. On the one hand, there is a productivity value of cities. I think in that respect, their ability to generate these clusters of productive industries in finance, high technology, entertainment, media, I think that's going to grow. So I think that cities are going to increase their hold on core industries, big cities like Toronto, like New York, like London, like San Francisco. And in fact, the geographic inequality, the divide between big, successful places and smaller, less successful places, that's going to grow. On the other hand, we like to talk about the amenity value of cities, how much cities are valued for the arts, the culture, the shared things, the theaters, the arenas, the sporting events, the great restaurants, the excitement they provide. And I think that value is going to decline dramatically in the short run, not in the long run, in the short run. So in that respect, I think people are going to say when we say a place to live, work, and play, cities are going to be in the short run a place that you work, and you're going to live and play at home. Even in China, the reports you hear is people go to work and go home. And so I think that living and playing is going to be done at home, in the backyard, maybe with trusted family and friends in small groups, socially distanced, maybe on a small block party. But you're not going to have large gatherings. There's not going to be a big sporting event. There's not going to be a Caravana festival or Coachella. There's not going to be going to a big Taylor Swift concert. Now, the opportunity for cities and communities there might be that people want to consume smaller scale culture, local arts, local performance on a more personalized basis. Now, if cities get ready for this, one of the things I've been writing about, they can develop local platforms, portals for artists, musicians, and chefs. And let me just make this as concrete as I can. Let's say in the summer, I want to have an event with some of my neighbors in Toronto, my friends, family. We go to the portal, we find a band or a musician or a DJ, we find some entertainers to entertain our kids, we find a chef, and maybe we do it outside on the street, or maybe we do it in a place that's open air, kind of like the Brickworks, which is near where I live, an open air market area in the ravine. And we're all careful and we're all trusted and we all socially distant. So now instead of importing culture or going to big mega arenas to see sports or stadia, you have a whole bunch of more personalized performances that, one, keep your small businesses and your small, your local artists going, and two, create a much more exciting life. So I think that's the way we're going to have to think about it. But we're not going to pop a button and go back to the way we were before. And what worries me is no one's thinking of this. I know that no one thought about testing, tracing, getting ready. We all forgot about that. But now we're in the middle of it, and everyone's thinking about surge capacity, building the medical capability, and getting financial assistance. And that's great. That's important. We need to do that. But now we're forgetting, like, okay, in another month, we're going to have to reopen. How are we? No one even, we're going to put some tape on the floor and paint a circle. So how do we prepare our cities? And the point is, we do have slack capacity. We have economic development, arts and cultural organizations, community development organizations, and just people who can do this planning if we empower them to do so. So I think that's where our focus has to shift.
Now we're going to take a short break before getting into the rest of the conversation with Richard Florida. Municipal World's executive membership delivers a powerful toolkit for managing Canada's towns and cities. You get the most complete suite of print and online news, plus high-impact communication services and exclusive member content, as well as information to help you and your community stay a step ahead. Executive membership is sized to fit your organization from 5 to 50 users per membership, and members report saving an average of $1,287 per year just on job postings. It's a smart investment that can quickly pay for itself. Become a member today. Does your municipality have COVID-19 resource materials to share with other communities for reference? Examples might include bylaws, communications and news releases, reports, memos to council, to name just a few. Municipal World is managing a central repository for such documents as a resource for the municipal community as they develop their responses to the pandemic. You can log into your account to access the resource page where you can view and contribute documents. You can find it at municipalworld.com/coronavirus-docs. Without further delay, let's jump back into that conversation with Richard Florida. There's been some talk about potentially having immunity passports, for example, for people who had COVID-19, and that somehow this large part of the population that is now recovered, finding a way to put them back to work safely and harnessing that. Do you think that's a possibility?
Hard to say, and certainly I'm not a doctor or a virologist or epidemiologist. Hard to say how much immunity has been built. Hard to say how many people have gotten this. We know it's a lot more than people think. We all have stories of friends who told us, I got this awful cold in the winter. My God, I was down for 2 weeks. Yeah. I ran a fever. I had a nasty cough. It's clearly been around for a while, but it's hard to say how much. I think that, we have to realize that our democracies, Canada, the United States, Europe, are not China. My friends, I talked to my friends in Hong Kong the other day. They said, not only this, what you said, not only immunity passports or things like that, tracking apps on the cell phones. They said, when one of their friends came back to Hong Kong, she was sent immediately to quarantine camp. Quarantine camp, not quarantine in your house. She was sent to a special place called quarantine camp. I don't think we're going to do that, but I do think this whole thing that we've had in cities about privacy is not going to be what it was. This whole kind of tech lash, there are people who said, I always said this to myself, I don't care where you track me. I don't care if you put a camera on the street, because I don't want anybody, I won't speed and I won't want else speeding. I'm not committing crime, so I want to feel safe. Put a camera up there, take a picture of me. But I think, Ezra Klein said the other day, if it comes between my privacy and my grandmother or mother being safe, I'm going with mom or grandma. And so I think the idea of tracking and tracing apps, the idea that Google and Apple will potentially activate your cell phone, that somebody punches in, I got the damn thing, and it alerts you that you've been in contact with them. Yeah, as long as we mitigate that, monitor that from public health agencies like they said they're going to. I see people saying, use technology to protect me and my family. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do in democracies is be fast to set up the governance mechanisms that make sure that kind of information is not abused or misused. But no, I think that we're going to have technology is going to be. It's not just medical technology that's going to give us a vaccine, or I think more importantly in the short run, good antiviral cocktails that treat the most heinous symptoms. And I've already heard, people getting these cocktails and people who are just going in to the hospital in the past couple of weeks getting them, and they seem to be working, but they'll figure out which ones really work. I think technology, tracking and tracing technology and monitoring technology will be a big way that we're going to have to manage our way through this, and I think people will go for it.
It's in addition to shifting our thinking on other things, it's going to shift our thinking around the privacy of our data and how that's used. We'll still want protection, but we're going to have a little bit more leniency, knowing that it's what's required to keep us all safe and healthy.
No, I agree. And I don't think people are going to go. I don't know about immunity passports, and I don't know how effective they'll be. But I certainly think people are going to take a test. They're going to want to know the serology test, whether they had it. And I think there'll be a whole variety of tracking and testing applications that not only make us feel safer, make us safer, and we'll use them. And then all of a sudden, in a couple of 3 years, maybe 4 years, this will all fade into memory and we'll all be gone.
Yeah. So talking about the timeline for this and what it is, there was just New York City near and dear to my heart. Was supposed to be there right now. Was supposed to have spent the Easter weekend there, and certainly thinking about the terrible time that they're going through there, and feeling for that community. Broadway announced they're closed now until at least June, but there's indications. Zeke Emanuel, an American healthcare expert, has just postulated that these large gatherings, we won't be seeing it in June. We won't be seeing it in October. It's going to be autumn 2021 before we see this again. So, and kind of these large gatherings being the last parts of the economy to open back up. What do you think the path for cities is going to look like? What are going to be the first things that we see opening?
I kind of agree with Zeke Emanuel on this. I think that big sporting events, big concerts, big conferences like South by Southwest, it's going to take a lot of time. People say in the 1918 pandemic, it took about 4 or 5 years till people felt comfortable gathering in large groups. More of my worry are the things that really make the economy function. Like, how long does it take to really get people on subways and trains? Is that going to be as long? It might be. I mean, we can see the data that this thing moves in enclosed environments. We can see the data from even the transit people in places like New York, which you just mentioned, the transit workers who got it. The governor of Connecticut tweeted the other day that so many cases cropped up along the rail lines that connect Connecticut to New York. He not only called it the commuter corridor, he kind of made this silly remark, maybe it's a COVID corridor. That's what worries me. And then, what happens if everyone decides they're going to drive? What happens to Toronto, right, a massively congested city, or New York? Probably hurt LA less, Los Angeles, because Los Angeles had no transit. It's as congested as could be, and remote work may offset it. What then happens if you can't really open the airport? I mean, when you think about a city like Toronto and Pearson Airport, or New York and John F. Kennedy or Newark Airport, or go down the list, if you don't have air travel, if people don't feel safe, so then what do you do to mitigate? Do you use apps to test people? Do you use digital thermometers and sensors to see if people have a cold? Do you make people write out their symptoms? Do you operate transit? The governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, who I know and like a lot, said he wanted transit to operate at 50% of capacity for a while. Do you have subways and trains? In China, you hear people you hear that people are having to reserve their time on a subway, not just on a train. So how do you get them up and running? How do you get people back into office buildings? If you and elevators. If you're scared of the damn stadium arena, you're going to be scared of the elevator. So in Singapore, they're taking temperatures. In China, they're logging symptoms. And then I think, what do you do with these big arenas? Now, I'm not that worried about them because they're big multinational enterprises. They're owned by billionaires. The big theme parks like Disney have the best people working on this. Maybe it takes a year or two, maybe it takes less time. Maybe there's a way, and maybe arenas don't come back. Maybe they play some sports without a live audience. Maybe they depend on TV time. Maybe they find a way to track and trace people, code those symptoms. Maybe they play with the arena half empty. I'm not sure, but I think this is going to be worked out. And I guess my main thing is it's not the arenas and the large gatherings that worry me. It really are the things that are essential to our economic functioning. And I do think trains, transits, office buildings, elevators, people are going to be scared. And, we had to put the fear of God in the people to get them to behave and to socially distance, but that fear is not going to go away soon.
Absolutely. And so, as you kind of alluded to there, the private sector certainly has good minds who are working on this now and who are going to provide some of the answers. But for folks who are civic planners, city planners, civic leaders, we're going to expect some of those answers to come from them too. And if you're in that role, what advice do you have? What do these folks need to be thinking about right now in terms of rebuilding our cities post-COVID?
Canada had a better response than the country of my birth, the United States. Clearly, to me, it shows the dysfunction of the American federal government and the fact that people are complaining about this, but at the end of the day, I think it shows how irrelevant it is. States and cities, great governors like Governor Cuomo or Governor Newsom or Governor Whitmer, mobilized response. Cities were up to the task. Cities mobilized with the federal government that, if anything, was hurtful, not helpful. So I think the first thing is that we have to realize that our best line of defense, and maybe Canada, simply because the provinces have more power to respond, right? And the provinces are like mini countries, could respond better. But I think it shows that the first line of defense in these things is not federal government. It's state and local government. So we've got to beef them up and give them the power and authority and governance. And I think that, our response and mobilization is going to depend on combinations of local, provincial, state, and then public and private sector working together. I mean, a lot of what we're doing to mobilize testing capacity, to develop digital tracking and testing is coming from private sector. And I think beefing up the public-private partnerships and making sure they work for everyone and they're democratically governed. I think the new political stars, if I was casting my bet on who were the political stars, in the United States, there were stars like, Governor Powell made during wars, or, I think General Eisenhower, who became president during World War II. I think the stars of our political stars of our future are going to be people who are really seen as leaders in this crisis. And we haven't seen them all yet. We've seen the first wave of stars that come out of the mobilization, particularly in the United States. But I think there are going to be a lot of leaders who are going to figure out how to reopen safely, take leadership, lead their people. So yeah, I think we're still waiting for the next political generation of stars to come about. But our ability to get through this will depend on the intentional and strategic action of states and cities, not just to mobilize, that's first phase. But we have two more phases to get through. Reopening, how do we prepare to reopen safely and securely? And then over the long run, how do we recover?
Great insights, Richard, as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I want to thank Richard Florida for taking time to sit down and chat with us, and thank you for listening. If you want to hear more from Richard Florida, follow him on Twitter at Richard_Florida. If you found the information in today's episode useful, we hope you'll please drop us a note to let us know, or give us a shout on Twitter at Municipal World. Until next time, I'm Susan Gardner. This is MW Shares. Please stay healthy, stay safe.